world where the impossible is made possible. There was once a little boy who had aspirations to be a hero. A hero that would save people. A hero that would help all those in need. But at the tender age of 4 years old, his life would change so drastically that you could say it would never be the same again. This is the story of Izuku Midoriya. Now, Izuku, when he was a kid, all he ever wanted was to be just like his idol, All Might. He would, on a regular basis, beg his mom to let him watch videos of All Might. Especially one specific video in particular. And as he would sit at his computer chair, bouncing back and forth, waiting for it to play, and then all of a sudden, a video of All Might saving bunches and bunches of civilians would pop up, and his little heart would just start soaring like a plane. He'd be so mesmerized by the hero with a fearless smile. He'd just want to be exactly like that hero, desperately. It was his dream. It was the only thing he could look forward to. His mom had tried her best to always encourage her little boy to keep hope in his heart that he would be a great hero, just like All Might when his quirk came in. But as time went on, it seemed the poor boy would never get his quirk. He didn't understand why, though. He couldn't. Nothing made sense to him anymore. So on his birthday, his mom took him to the quirk doctor to see what his quirk would be. And the doctor had told her that Izuku's quirk was unknown to the system. For some reason, it couldn't read it. It just didn't seem to make sense to them. Inko was worried that her poor baby boy wouldn't have a quirk. But this wasn't the case. Deku had a quirk, it just hadn't manifested yet. But when it did, he would be in for a rude awakening. So, on his birthday, he invited his childhood friend Bakugo Katsuki over to his house. And they decided that they'd have as much fun as possible in order to cheer him up. Deku was so happy that his friend was there for him, that he believed in him. Now, Bakugo by no means was an innocent kid. He was a downright punk at times, but he never held any kind of hatred for Deku. In fact, he was more prone to protecting Deku because he felt that if Deku couldn't protect himself, that he should. Alas, after Bakugo had their party, Bakugo's mom eventually came to pick him up and take him home. And there, on that very same night, Deku was playing with his new All Might toys, his little All Might figurines, and mysteriously, that very same night there was a full moon. Deku asked his mom if he could go sit by the window and pretend like he was playing, that All Might was saving the neighborhood outside. Not seeing a problem with it, Inko gladly let her baby go sit next to the window and pretend like All Might was fighting villains outside. And that's when Deku looked up into the sky. He looked very, very deep into that moon, thinking how pretty it looked, how very interesting it was. He couldn't put his finger on it. It just seemed like something about the moon compelled him. It drew him in. And then he started feeling a weird, itchy sensation all over his body. His arms were itchy, his legs were itchy. It sounded like he could hear sound a lot better all of a sudden. He was freaking out. He didn't understand what was going on. He wanted to know what was going on. But as he looked out the window, nothing seemed to make sense to him. Then, as he got up, as he observed his arms more, he realized that his arms, they seemed to be growing some kind of very thick, long, shaggy green hair. It was spreading all up and down his arms. It didn't want to go away. It made him scared. It made him frightened. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't know what to do. It hurt. His whole body hurt. He felt like he was being torn up from the inside out. All he could do was sit and watch as all this matted green fur grew all over his body. His mom, not knowing why he seemed to be screaming so loud, she came out to the main room and asked her dear sweet baby what was going on. And when she saw him, she panicked. She freaked out. She wasn't sure what was going on with her baby. So she looked at him, and in front of her sat Izuku, but his fur was matted, thick, all over his body. It looked like she thought he looked like a beast. She was afraid of her Izuku. She thought that he was a monster and that he would start hurting people. She tried to approach him and comfort him, but all she saw was a monster in front of her. Some beastly freak. She thought, I can't have a son like this. I'll be a monster. Who would want a hero like this, she thought. As she then pulled her Izuku close, telling him that she'll help him. Telling him that he would be alright. That she would take care of all his pain and all this suffering he felt. And that she'd make it all go away. She buckled Izuku into her car and told him that she was going to be taking him somewhere to help him feel better. Deku just wanted it to stop. All his pain in his body. He didn't want it to hurt anymore. And he thought his mother was telling the truth. He thought that she would never, ever do anything to hurt him. So she took him in her car into a deep, dark forest. She said that she'd help him to survive and that she'd ease his pain very soon. After driving for what felt like 30 minutes, his pain started to subside a little bit, and he strangely felt hungry. He asked his mom if they can go home so that he can have some katsudon, that his pain feels like it went away. But she said that she needed to do something real quick. That such a cool quirk needed a lot of preparation in order to help him become a hero. Of course, she was lying, though. The only thing she saw of the boy was a monster, and she thought to herself she had to get rid of it. So, she did. After driving God knows how far into the deep forest, she eventually thought that she had gone deep enough that there would be no way for him to have any chance of survival. She opened the door. She told him that she needed him to stay there for a little bit while she went to go find a hero who can help him master his powers. This was something that Deku believed. He believed that she was doing this for his own good, to help him. He thought that she wanted to help him in order to have him be able to learn to use his powers better. So, he did. He sat up against a tree and waited patiently as his mom went to go. And she told him that no matter what he does, that he cannot leave the forest. That she'd be back for him, not to stay right there. He had no reason to believe his mom wouldn't come back. He had no reason to believe that she'd lie. So good, like a good boy, he just sat and waited as she drove away into the night. He waited and waited and waited and questioned and questioned. Where is she? He thought to himself, where's Mommy? Why isn't she back yet? He sat there for hours, on end, hoping, praying that she would come back for him, that she would return soon. Deku was scared. He was frightened. He was hungry even. But he felt like if he didn't stay there, his mom would be mad that he moved from his spot. But he thought just a little longer. And night came, and he felt in stride, and it was cold. So very cold. Under the light of the moon, he observed his body. He realized that his arms were covered in a lot of fur and resembled that of dog legs or something canine. He thought to himself that his quirk made him a really big dog. Maybe a puppy? This was his only comfort. He thought that he was maybe just some puppy, and that his mom might have some friends that had some kind of dog-like quirk that could help him to be a hero. But as night turned to day, she still wasn't back. He had woken up in a pile of leaves. His stomach growled, and it felt like he had a knot deep in his gut. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't know why she wasn't back yet. He kept questioning, why wasn't Mommy back yet? I'm so hungry. I need something to eat. But if I move, what if she can't find me? So he sat, and day turned to night, and then night turned back to day. He was scared, frightened, cold, hungry. The pain in his stomach grew even worse. At this point, he didn't know if he'd be able to live. It felt like someone tore a hole in his gut. He wanted to scream. He wanted to shout. It hurt. Nothing felt right to him anymore. He wished it would all go away. The pain would go away. And as day turned back to night, and for the third time, night turned to day, he was out of it. He was so very hungry. He couldn't even understand his surroundings anymore. It was just so much pain. It made him feel sick to his stomach to feel so hungry. He beckoned himself to move, but his body felt so empty, so drained. It felt like his body was cramping. He just couldn't bear it. He was barely able to drag himself over to a bush that had berries on it. what looked to be juicy red berries. He started eating them, one at a time, slowly but steadily enjoying them. For as long as it would take. He thought that he'd finally be rid of the pain in his stomach. He was happy to finally have something to eat. And that's when he heard a weird noise from behind him. A low growl. When he turned around, before him stood a large grizzly bear, baring its teeth at him, growling hungrily. He was so freaked out that he started backing up very quickly. The grizzly bear drew closer. It didn't want any berries. What it wanted was meat. And in front of it was a full course meal. One that would get it through the rest of its day, satisfied. As it lunged towards him, Deku turned and tried to run as fast as he could. But because of the fact that he hadn't been eating for the past couple days, his body was still weak. He was barely able to outrun the grizzly bear. But unfortunately, Deku wasn't going to get away without having paid his lump of flesh. So, the grizzly bear was able to take the tip of his tail. This hurt deep. Deku wanted to scream. He wanted to shout. All he felt was raging pain all throughout his body. It made him want to run faster when that bear took a chomp out of his tail. He ran and ran and ran as fast as he could, eventually finding a way to be rid of the bear. He thought himself lucky to have gotten away with his life. But he would come to learn that a lot of harsh reality would come to pass as he began to gather all the strength he could to find more food out in the wilderness. He found himself very scared that any time he'd try and eat something else would try and make him its dinner. So before approaching a different type of bush, he made sure to look around as much as possible, trying to essentially make sure to scout the area. Deku was learning fast that in order to survive, you have to play smart. Now, even though Deku is young, he's not stupid. He's rather intelligent. He's always been hyper intelligent. The only problem is that as time goes on, he'd start to lose his ability to understand basic human language due to being in the wilderness for so long. But this too would come with time. And as long as he was able to survive That's all that mattered. He grew very, very keen, watching out for the slightest of sounds. The rustling of leaves, the low tone grunt of forest animals. Eventually, he found his way out of the forest, though he wasn't sure exactly how much time had passed. He was unaware of whether or not it had been days, maybe months, since he was last in what could be considered civilization. All he knew was that he needed to find a way to get out of that of the forest and into a better way of life. He needed to find out what was next for him. So, he left the forest after a while. He desperately tried to cave his way into the city, trying to figure out what it could happen. Whether or not he'd be able to find any kind of sustainable food or not. He wasn't entirely sure. Though, it's hard to say whether or not that mate was fair or not to him. All he knew was that survival was his only option. He could only count on himself. He went from street corner to street corner, looking around, trying to make sense of his situation, till he eventually found himself wandering the street, where he saw a mugger. His belly rumbled, a deep growl, and a slight glimmer shot through his head as he remembered that he wanted to be a hero to people. He wanted to help others in need, and he felt he couldn't sit by and watch a mugger hurt a poor innocent person. He desperately wanted to help them, so he did. As fast as his little legs could carry him, he jumped onto the mugger's back, quickly getting a hold of them, trying his hardest to stop them from doing what they did. Though, this act of his wouldn't come without a lump of flesh, too. Because the mugger had what could be only considered a blade quirk, which he used in order to cut at one of Midoriya's paws, trying to get free of his bite. Midoriya could taste the blood in his mouth from the mugger. It tasted sweet. It tasted good to him. He liked the flavor of blood. It tasted good. And he was just so hungry. Deku knew that killing was wrong, but he just couldn't deal with all the hunger he felt. He thought he was helping by getting rid of a villain. So, he sunk his teeth deep into the villain's back, this allowing him to help the civilian to escape in time. Now, on the other hand, Deku desperately wanted to have his cake and eat it too. So as he took the lump of flesh from the mugger, he could hear a hero in the distance. He thought that he would be praised for having saved that poor, defenseless civilian. But instead, the hero yelled and screamed, "Someone! We've got to get... we need to take out that beast." He didn't understand. Beast? He helped that person. He saved that person. What do they mean, beast? He couldn't understand. He didn't know what they were talking about. He thought, "I'm not a beast. What do you mean?" He desperately wanted to understand what was going on. But he felt that there was no way to truly understand it. So he ran. He ran far again, as far as his legs would take him, trying desperately to make his escape. But that hero wouldn't let him get away without having given him some kind of mark. So the hero, in an attempt to, you could say, subdue Deku in some fashion, ended up using their quirk which was a fire quirk, in order to burn him. This made Deku want to scream in pain. It hurt. He felt like his body was going to break again. He felt like he couldn't take it. Like this was too much. He didn't understand why he had to go through so much pain all the time. He didn't understand why this was happening to him. All he wanted was to be a hero. Why did everyone feel the need to try and take that away from him, he thought. In anger, in rage, he fought back. He quickly rushed away as fast as he could, trying to avoid the heroes. He knew that the only way that he'd be able to get away is if he was to use the forest that he came from before. He thought that was his only safe haven. So he went back. He went back and found a cave. This cave was one that he'd used a couple times within the past however many days since he had lost count. The cave seemed to have been abandoned a long time ago by whatever last lived there. So he decided to take advantage of such good luck he felt in finding such a rare commodity and make it his own. Now, Deku by no means thought that he was above having to pay for his crimes, but being so young, he didn't understand the ramifications of what having hurt a villain like that would do, or how people would see it. He didn't understand how corrupt society was, or even why society was the way it was. So he hid in that cave, hoping that the heroes wouldn't come looking for him. By no means did he want to hurt the heroes. He wanted to be one, even if it meant that he had to do it through more unhero-like means. All that mattered was that he got to do what he wanted and help people. So from then on, he would usually wait through the day or sleep through the day and come out at night to do what he wanted. To prey on any villain who thought themselves above the hero society, who thought themselves above the law even. Deku had no mercy for those who wanted to hurt others. He found himself multiple times on the edge of ripping a villain's throat out. So, at night he would go into the city, and he would find any unlucky villain that thought themselves above it all, and he would hunt them down. This leading him to finding a couple of more unsavory villains. Now, Deku, knowing that he couldn't exactly play the cards right if he let himself get caught by a hero, would usually only wander into the city at night and would usually try and stick to the shadows as much as possible. After a while, people came up with a name for him. They would address him as the Hellhound, or the Hound of Nightmares. Because any villain who thought themselves too good or too high would always fall to the Hound of Hell. Now, Deku has lived like this for many, many years. He's gotten used to being called a monster. He's gotten used to people being afraid of him. He didn't care. As long as he was protecting people his own way, it didn't make a difference to him. As long as people were safe from villains, he would gladly take the mantle of the hated hero. That's just the kind of person Deku was. Selfless to a fault. But, unfortunately, he never really accounted for how it would be to be all by himself all the time. The loneliness, it got to him a lot. He'd always find himself questioning if what he was doing was truly right. He'd always be doubting if he was really doing the right thing, but would usually blow the thought away when he would remember all those people who were getting hurt, all because villains didn't know how to control themselves. Because the villains let their greed control them. Deku would not stand by and watch as innocent people who are only trying to live their lives would get hurt. I'll say he's lived like this for, let's see. I'll say 10 years. Yeah, 10 years. He's become very notorious in those 10 years. He's been the Hound of Hell. Remember, he turned into this when he was only 4. So, that would make him 14. 2 years before... Wait. I think his canon self would go into UA. On one of his nightly adventures, he would find himself prowling around, from jumping from rooftop to rooftop, when he heard a girl cry out. She sounded so afraid. She sounded hurt. His instincts kicked in as he jumped to help whoever was in danger. And when he had landed, he found himself on top of a villain who was attacking a girl with shoulder-length brunette hair. The girl was crying her eyes out, and this man tried to mug her and more than likely do a lot of other distasteful, unsavory things to her. He was able to deduce that by the fact that it looked like the girl had a bit of her shirt ripped by the man in her attempt to struggle to get out of his hands. Deku was angry that such a horrid thing had been going on. He was angry because at the thought of how many people that this sick villain of a mugger could have hurt, how many women he had more than likely assaulted like this. To be this confident. The girl slowly backed away, eventually leading her to have her back like meet a wall as she laid against it, crying her eyes out in fear. Deku didn't want her to see this next part, so he grabbed the struggling villain by the back of the collar and dragged him away into the darkness. The girl looked up, freaked out, wondering what happened to that creature, before she heard something click or snap. And then the wolf came back. From her perspective, she could hardly see it in its silhouette very slowly walking up to her. She was afraid. She was freaked out. She'd almost been robbed, and she didn't want to process the next part of that sentence before it had come and done something to that awful man. As the wolf had very subtly passed under the light, she got a good look at it. What she saw made her breath hitch. She saw a wolf. This freaked her out. She thought, what is a wolf doing in the city? And why is its fur all green? It slowly but steadily walked up to her. Slow pace, even steps. Almost like it was getting ready to pounce on her. Before she could register anything else, she closed her eyes in anticipation of it leaping at her and crushing her windpipe. She put her hands to her head and looked between the gap in her arms, and she saw its head droop down. It looked like it was sad. It looked like it was unhappy for some reason. She thought to herself, why does it seem so unhappy at my response? Why did it care? She thought. She didn't know why this animal had suddenly showed such human emotion. She took her hands away from her face and slowly and steadily leaned forward towards it, sticking her hand out in a palming position with her palm facing skyward, almost beckoning it over to her. It raised its head and looked into her eyes, slowly but steadily walking over to her. When it got into reaching distance, it bowed its nose into her hand and began gently sniffing her hand, almost like he was trying to get familiar with her, try and recognize her, become familiar, like it was like learning who she was before its nose traveled up the length of her arm up onto her. It looked into her eyes, and in its eyes she saw an intelligence, almost like a deep well of knowledge inside of its eyes. They looked human, kind of. On its fur, its deep, dark green fur, were a bunch of bloody knots. Like its coat was so soaked in blood that it dried to the poor thing's coat. And like, it couldn't get it off, obviously. She felt bad for this poor creature. It had a longing for companionship, but in its eyes she saw something she didn't understand. It moved its head into the crook of her neck, and it just pressed in on her, like it wanted a hug, like it wanted physical touch from something else. She very gently wrapped her arms around it and gave it a hug, and a very low-toned whine escaped its lips as it seemed to cry. Switching perspectives to how Deku viewed this, He dragged the man away and broke his neck for all he had done. When he went back to check on the girl, he found her hyperventilating. She seemed so afraid. He only wanted to check on her, and whenever he drew closer into the light, she seemed to get on guard, even though he was trying his best to not look threatening. Again, he felt dejected. Someone else in society deemed him a freak, deemed him something dangerous. He knew that what he was doing might not be morally right, killing villains, but he knew that if he had just let them go, they'd hurt other people. He was just getting rid of the problem at the source, taking out those who deserved it. That's when his head drooped in sadness, longing for compassion for the longest time. These 10 years alone have worn him out. He's finally broken at this point. He's hardly able to deal with it. And then he sees her reach out to him for some reason. In her eyes, he sees compassion. In her eyes, he sees a loving soul. Something inside of him wants to reach out and grab onto it. He doesn't know why, but he feels so attracted to her presence. He draws close and sniffs her hand. On her he smells sunflowers, peaches, roses. Smells the scent of baked goods. He likes this smell. It brings him peace. It brings him happiness. He draws closer, and when he looks into her eyes, he doesn't see fear. He doesn't see disgust. He doesn't see hate. All he sees is her. It's like her soul was bared to him. It's like for the first time in a long time, she was able to understand him. Able to understand that even though he may have killed a villain in front of her very eyes, in a metaphorical standpoint, he wasn't bad. He drew closer to her and pressed up on her. And in an unexpected turn, she wrapped her arms around him and held him tight. These 10 years of isolation, loneliness, self-hatred, and disgust at what he was doing, it all broke the dam. He began to cry in his broken, ununderstandable wolf whines. He wept in her shoulder. She just held him tight and pet him. Truly, he thought she was a nurturing soul that only sought to heal him. Switching the perspective back to Uraraka, she gently pushed him away and began to stand up. She didn't want to let it go. She felt connected to this creature somehow. She didn't know if it could even understand her, but she certainly wanted to try. So she asked it if it wanted to stay with her in her apartment. It looked curiously at her, and she figured that it wouldn't understand. And as she looked back at it, it seemed to open its mouth, and in a broken sounding voice, it spoke. Home? She was taken aback. It knew how to speak. Did it say home? She took a step back, not knowing what was going on, but this creature really was filled with intelligence, she thought. It asked if she was wanting it to go home. She looked at it and said, No. I'm asking if you want to come to my home. Deku's tail slowly started to wag left and right, symbolizing that he was happy. He seemed ecstatic at the idea of going home with someone, of even having a home. She smiled at this. Smiled because she knew in her heart that she wanted to keep it safe. She wanted to protect it like it protected her. And then she said to it, Yes, you come home with me. In a broken voice, it tried to respond, okay. She smiled a big, genuine grin and told it to follow her. And so it did. Cautious at first, but then as they drew closer to a more dangerous, shady side of town, it got right up next to her in a defensive position, as if it was ready to protect her at all cost. She wasn't aware of what it was doing until it clicked. It knows that this area is dangerous, and it's moved to protect me. It's moved to get in a defensive position. This revealed to her another level of intelligence from this big green wolf. Now, as she got to her apartment, she knew that she could probably easily hide him inside without the landlord knowing, due to the fact that her apartment isn't exactly very expensive and or not very technological, so she can easily probably get into her apartment without the landlord knowing, because there's no security cameras around. Though she did try to practice caution by telling it that they needed to be quiet and not make a lot of noise. Understanding this, Izuku decided that it would try to minimize its sound as much as possible while going up the stairs to her apartment. Now, as they got to her apartment, she unlocked it, and right before going in, she heard something come from her right, from inside. And as she unlocked it, the door swung open, and a person, seemingly having broken into her apartment, seemed to come out before Deku jumped in to intercept the would-be robber and latched on to to the person's hand, having taken that made the hand that holds the offending weapon immobile by breaking the wrist and clamping on hard. Uraraka, being stunned by this, watches the scene as Deku seems to have pulled on the robber to get it out of her apartment, and then, having knocked the robber to the ground, he jumps on the back of them and seems to latch on to the back of their neck before delivering a very subtle pop. This not killing the robber, more like popping their airways long enough to asphyxiate them a little bit till they passed out. Also, kind of breaking their spinal column. Deku very subtly grabs onto the pants leg of said robber and drags them down the flight of stairs, because this is a outside apartment, like where you don't go into a building. It's like straight from outside into the apartment. Drags them down the flight of stairs, and then kind of drags them into an alleyway before returning to Uraraka, who is still shaken up by the fact that Deku has effectively saved her 2 times in one night. She looks at him and then starts petting his head, telling him, "Good boy. Good boy." This making Deku's tail wag uncontrollably from happiness from protecting her. She gets back up and proceeds to go back into her apartment, and then starts to go on about why the hell would they go into her apartment. There's hardly anything for them to steal. It was a pointless endeavor. A lot of things that Deku didn't entirely understand, but Uraraka made sure to lock the door as much as possible. Now remember, Deku does technically have a very strong intelligence. He's just not talked to people in a long time, so his ability to talk is very, I'll say, messed up. So he's able to remember how things should be, proper etiquette, and what the difference between someone being poor versus rich looks like. He does still understand those social cues. And as he's walking around inside of Uraraka's apartment, he gets a very subtle intuition that she's not very well off. He gets the feeling that she doesn't really have a lot to begin with, and this kind of makes him pity her in a sense. As he does feel bad for her having to live like this. In her apartment, there is maybe one couch, a very small TV on top of a dresser, a couple of kitchen utensils, a sink, a bathroom, and a futon. It's very minimalistic, and he feels bad for her. He wishes he could help her more. When she looks at him and sees him, she realizes that his intelligence is more advanced than she first thought. And she proceeds to walk over to her couch and sit on it and beckon him to come sit with her. She tells him that she's sorry that she can't offer him a better place to live. That she's sorry she can't do much for him in terms of a lot of things, but that she'll try her best to give him the love that he wants. Now, Deku, while technically being a vigilante of sorts, I'm going to say that from like a perspective that technically whenever he stopped robbers, you know where this is going. He may or may not have technically amassed a collection that he took back to his cave that he knows of, and though he doesn't understand the value of money, technically, he took anything that looked like it was valuable from robbers. Like if, for example, like robbers had robbed a jewelry store or a bank or something like that, since like he may not know exactly where they stole it from, he would usually just keep it. And he amassed a giant collection in his cave. Now, technically, he didn't know that it was valuable, but he thought to himself that he wants to give her something to help her cheer up. He wants to make her happy, in a sense. So he cuddles up real close to her and says, in like as best as he can, me want help you live better. Me want protect you from harm. She technically tried to like puzzle together what he was saying, and while it was slightly difficult to understand, she got the general idea, and she started petting him, telling him that he doesn't need to take care of her, that she lives moderately comfortably, even if she's not 100% like in good condition, that she tries her best, and that she'll try her best with him too. And that he needs to be careful not to let people know that he lives there. That he's kind of a secret now. Deku trying to learn how speaking should be is using his intellect to try and puzzle together how to communicate properly with her. So, with as much mental capacity as he can muster after 10 years of silence, he tells her that he wants to help her for her kindness. He wants to be her friend. That no one treats him good. He has been hurt a lot. People scared of him. Uraraka not really knowing exactly what he means by people hurt him and people are scared of him. She takes it upon herself to kind of try and clean him up a bit, because of the fact that he's covered in a lot of blood and mud and dirt, and she thinks he could probably use a good bath. So, with what little she has in terms of cleaning products for herself, she goes ahead and tries to give him a bath. Now, Deku, still technically being a human and also a boy, he kind of fights it a bit because he's embarrassed, but by all means he's also kind of aware, he's not entirely aware of gender differences between boys and girls entirely, or other stuff. So she explains to him that she believes that he must be uncomfortable with all the blood on him, so he kind of gives up in a sense and lets her do as she wishes. So she takes him in there and she washes all the dirt, mud, and blood off of him, and she gets him all clean and proceeds to also try and brush all of the knots out of his coat, and is amazed at how much hair he is shedding on the brush, and thinks that she has somehow collected enough hair to create a secondary dog the size of a chihuahua. It's funny. And after properly taking all that extra hair out of his coat and seeing how funny he looks when all of his fluffy, poofy werewolf hair is kind of all wet, and having a good laugh at the situation, she dries him off and decides that she wants to I guess, how do I put this? That now that he's clean, she should probably change her clothes, since technically she's not her shirt is still kind of ripped from that guy who attacked her before Deku had saved her. So after he's effectively clean, he goes to sit on her couch as she collects some clothes, and as she's technically well, I feel horrible for saying this. As he's sitting on the couch and she's collected her clothes, she begins to start stripping her clothes off before he distinctively shouts, "What you doing?" And she looks at Deku with her shirt off and says, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" Deku replies with, "Me is boy." Uraraka is still not getting the point. She says, "Well, yeah, you're a dog, though. Why do you care?" Deku then replies with, "Me not dog. Me boy. Me human boy." Uraraka, having a hard time technically understanding what he's trying to say, she moves closer to him while also taking her pants off so she can change into some jammies, and walks over to him with her pajama shirt and pants still in hand and says, "What are you talking about?" Deku, at this point, if he had skin, would have been as red as crimson. Says, "Me not dog. This quirk." Uraraka does a double take in her head and says, "What?" Deku then finishes, "Me not know how turn off quirk." She very quickly turns as red as a tomato. She is very embarrassed and proceeds to quickly put her jammy shirt and pants on before turning to him and apologizing profusely for having done that in front of him. He then replies, "He not mad. He just embarrassed." Now that she knows the situation a bit more understandably, she is very unhappy that she had done that in front of him, though it does raise a question for her as to why he doesn't seem to have a home of sorts. And when she asks him this, his face kind of droops down before looking back at her and telling her, "Mama no want me. Mama leave me in forest." Uraraka's heart broke when she heard him say that. She decided that she would be the best thing in his life, and that she would help him to learn how to use his quirk properly, since more than likely it doesn't seem that he has much else. Though she doesn't understand exactly what's going on, she feels obligated to help him as much as possible. And even though he is technically a human boy, who doesn't know how to use his quirk, she does kind of still see him like a wolf at the moment. So with as much dignity as she can muster, she basically tells Deku that she wants him to come lay on the futon next to her. That way that, like, she can have basically a cuddle buddy and it might help him sleep. Deku, being a little bit embarrassed about this, does as she asks and very, very subtly scoots up next to her and lays down before she proceeds to wrap her arms from like around under him and like around where his abdomen would be, and just kind of holds him really close to her, real tight. Deku, feeling a sense of peace kind of wash over him, he then cuddles up closer to her before closing his eyes and finally falling asleep. And that's the end of this part. I hope you enjoyed. And don't forget, the shadows are watching.